Hi everybody, this is Doug Keller coming to you from YogaU with a little tutorial on some tips for working with Supta Padangusthasana, the reclining leg stretch, which is primarily a hamstring stretch, but it involves a few other elements that can often make it a little bit difficult to make progress in the pose and to experience the benefits of the pose. So I'm going to give a few tips for working with this pose and variations for getting a better stretch to the hamstrings. The first thing to realize is that there has to be a little bit of strength in the lower back to hold the pelvis steady as we get the hip to flex. Because when you do the reclining leg stretch, it's essentially as one leg is straight on the floor or bent, the first action is to get the hip to flex well. And if the lower back drops into the floor or rounds, this is even when you have the other knee bent, if the hips tilt back too much, you get a little bit stuck in the hip flexor and it's actually hard to get the hamstring to stretch well. So we want to increase the strength of the lower back so that as you do the stretch, most often done with a belt across the foot, you can maintain the arch in the back as you stretch the hamstring, not collapsing back and feeling the tightness at the front of the hip. A nice little strengthener to begin with and a release as a little variation on Viparita Karni, where I'll use a block, come on the tiptoes, lift the hips up, and place the block underneath the sacrum, so it puts me in a little bit of an extra back bend with the feet on the floor. And the first thing I'll do is simply take the knees up so the knees are a little bit higher than the hips. This creates a little release in the hip flexors while I maintain the openness of the chest and the arch in the lower back. If the back collapses down like this, you feel the gripping at the front as well as tightness in the neck. So you come into that little back bend and you can remain like this, feeling how you're working the lower back, or even start to challenge yourself to stretch the legs up towards the ceiling while maintaining the arch, not allowing it to collapse. Main point is the lower back. Straightening the legs is just an extra challenge. You can spend a couple moments like this. And also, a little bit of a release for the hips is you can take the left foot down to the floor, keep the hips on the block. You've already got a little better flexion in the hip because of the back bend that you're in. You can take the right foot across the belt. You can take the belt across the right foot, arch the back so you get the hip flexion, and then start to stretch the leg up. And a key point here is when you straighten the leg, don't let the knee move away from you. Because the more the knee locks and moves away from you, the more the pelvis tilts backwards, and once again, you're tight in the hip and weak in the lower back. So it's better to keep the knee a little bit above the hip point being here. And if you like a little extra challenge, start to slide the left leg out along the floor, reaching through the inner heel and ball of the big toe. That helps you to maintain that arch in the back as you work with straightening the leg that's up in the air. Brings more awareness to that action of the spine as you start to come into the hamstring stretch. This can be a bit much for people, so having the other knee bent, foot on the floor is fine to work with. This is just a warm-up for the back, so if you feel a pulling in the sit bone, you don't have to go very far in the stretch. For the second side, I'll bend the left knee, place the belt around I'll bend the right knee, place the belt around the left foot, arch the back, and then start to work with the stretch, perhaps sliding the opposite leg out along the floor to lengthen through the psoas and go a little bit deeper, focusing on finding that flexion in the hip as I stretch the hamstring. Again, the flexion may come better with the knee slightly bent, focusing on the arch of the back rather than worrying about straightening the leg entirely. That's just a little warm up with a little extra challenge. Take the feet down, lift the hips up, we'll slide the block out. Then you're a little bit more aware of keeping the strength of the lower back. Second thing to understand, as I said, with stretching the hamstring, is when you straighten the leg, if the knee moves away from you like this, the hamstring is actually becoming shorter, not longer. So the knee locks away from you. It's shortening the two ends of the hamstrings. And then if you pull on the leg, you're just rolling around on the pelvis, not generally lengthening or stretching it. So the effort is to keep the knee in one place, and instead of the knee moving away from you, keep the knee in one place and let the leg move up like this into the stretch to genuinely lengthen the hamstring, while essentially keeping the hip and the thigh bone in the same place in the hip joint. Just work on stretching the back of the leg closer to the knee. A way to support this, because it's very difficult not to allow the leg to move away, is we can take the belt across the arch of the foot. This takes the calf out of it because many people experience tightness in the calves. First, cross the belt in front of the ankle just to hold it in place, and then make a second cross behind the calf. So the X of the belt is right in the middle of the calf. Have the elbows out to the sides. Create the arch in the back we were just practicing. As you pull strongly on the belt, you can start to straighten the leg, and the belt basically restrains the leg from moving away from you. Try to keep the knee in the same place, neck long, and work with stretching this way. Inhaling, releasing a little bit to open the chest. Exhaling, going a little bit further into the bend. Even stretching the other leg out along the floor to feel the stretch very strongly. Because of the dynamic of this stretch, you may not get very far as the thigh coming towards the chest, but it's just getting the hamstring to work, particularly above the knee. For the second side, we'll release the belt, come back to a neutral spine, then with that arch in the back, take the belt across the arch of the left foot, cross in front of the ankle, back behind the calf. Again, the X of the belt is in the back of the calf, supporting the calf. So you bend the knee slightly higher than the hip, keep the neck long, and then using the belt as a kind of supportive hammock, you can start to straighten the leg as if you're kicking the foot up higher towards your nose, feeling the stretch in the hamstring. If you'd like, stretch the other leg out along the floor and work with the breath, inhaling and opening, exhaling and stretching, just using the belt to restrain the calf so the knee doesn't move away from you quite so much. This puts it much more in the hamstring, and you feel less resistance from the calf because you don't have your toes on the belt. This is a pretty strong warm-up, and if you're feeling a strong pulling in the sit bone, just back off a little bit and work with gently straightening the leg, feeling the stretch more in the middle and the hamstring closer to the knee instead of closer to the sit bone. That's one variation. An extra variation to add, which works with the four corners of the foot and changes the dynamic of the hip, is to take the belt, take a block, should be a plastic block, not a wooden one. We'll wrap the belt around the block, giving equal length to the two sides of the belt. And then the challenge is to balance the block on your foot, spreading the toes. You can have the other leg bent. So you take the leg up. The only instruction you need is don't drop the block. So you spread the toes, big toe, little toe, inner heel, outer heel, little arch in the lower back. This prevents you from pulling too hard on the belt. It also makes you work the leg and the hip in a way that doesn't allow you to flex the foot back, tightening the calf, or tilt the foot to one side or the other. Working all four corners of the feet. Again, you can stretch the other leg out. And as you work in this way, keeping the block basically level to the floor, at least as you get to 45 degrees, it feels different in the hip because the thigh bone becomes centered in the hip differently. Just work with the stretch, not pulling too hard on the belt, but just lightly using the belt to direct the leg into the stretch. If you want some extra fun, take the foot up, hold both ends of the belt, see if you can balance the block on the foot, and take the leg out to the side, turning the toes a little bit towards the floor to stretch the inner thigh. And then take the leg back up. And for the second side, bend the left knee. The challenge is to switch over to the left foot without dropping the block. You get the foot centered on the block. Other knee bend. Again, spread the toes to balance the block. Stretch the right leg out. And then start to straighten the leg, spreading the toes. Big toe, little toe. Balancing the block on the foot as you encourage the leg to come into the stretch. You can feel you're working the leg well if you bring the leg to a point of a stretch, thigh muscle firm, and you can let go of the belt without the leg changing position. Then you can take the leg a little bit farther, maintaining the arch. Again, see if you can release the belt, holding it in position, and you start to appreciate how your quadricep is working to help the hamstring stretch. You reach a certain point where that's not possible anymore, but you get the idea of how to work the leg. Again, hold both ends of the belt in the left hand, the right hand of the thigh for balance. Take the leg out to the side just enough to stretch the inner thigh, toes slightly towards the floor. And then inhale, take the leg back up, bend the knee, release the block down, and then come up to sitting. Just a couple of suggestions for working differently with Supta Padangusthasana to have a different experience of the hamstring and also strengthen the lower back to support your hamstring stretches. Thanks again for joining me at YogaU. Namaste.